Hello and welcome to our April episode of Staying Global While Staying Home. I'm Lucy Newcomb, your host today and CEO of Newcomb Global. We specialize in global business from the inside out, marketing, business development, global leadership development. It's my great pleasure to have our featured guest today, Villius, the Chief Sales Officer at Vistatec, who will be speaking with us about content strategy. Often we work regionally in these conversations, but today we're going to embrace a more global issue which affects us all. Welcome, Un.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Real pleasure to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Why don't we start by having you tell us just a little bit about Vistatec, put us in context.
Sure, I can do that quickly. So we have been in business for the last, coming up on 24 years now, started and still headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. And now with offices and presences globally. It's very interesting to see how our staffing has changed over the last, over the years, but with an acceleration, I'd say, in the last 3-4 years, with now more than half the staff is outside Ireland, all over Europe, all over South America, all over the US, all over Asia, so kind of everywhere at this stage. What we do, we are a we see ourselves as a global content solutions provider. I think the LSP concept is very outdated at this stage. And especially since we're really starting to see some interesting stuff, we're not going to go back to localization 101 in the 1980s, but where we are now is really at the edge of creating content from scratch and creating local content for specific markets. So writing, copywriting, rather than translating or transcreating. The story need to resonate, not just the language. So that's really cool, actually.
It's very cool. And I see a lot of people still in the language provider services mode. So it's interesting because as you talk, it sounds like you're almost the Netflix of content providing.
Yeah, and it's one of these, there is a lot of concern, I think, in the industry about what's happening in terms of machine translation, the robots taking over.
Right.
And will I have a job? But the reality is there is so much content out there. If everyone in the world was a translator, it still wouldn't get translated. So what's happening is that the utilitarian content, instructional, bulk, knowledge bases, all of that stuff, a lot of things in that arena is going into machine translation with some post-editing, perhaps because you need to check for accuracy. And it's opening up space for this much more creative and interesting part of language, which is either transcreating or really writing from scratch. So I think it's an enormous and really exciting opportunity for any linguist out there.
Well, yes, and for companies, because thanks to companies like yours, like Vistatec, companies can communicate with a non-template kind of approach, much more person to person, and the whole movement in marketing and content development worldwide towards personalization, greater customer intimacy can only be facilitated at that very local creation level like you're speaking about.
Absolutely. No, you are entirely right. That's exactly it. And companies, of course, can, with all of the automation that's happening, they can get a lot of content out there for a lot less than they could in 10 years. And that money that they are saving can be spent on this higher brand value content that's more directly customer facing and brand enhancing.
Brilliant. Let's take a step back, and I apologize, I neglected to talk about your bio first before we got started on Vistatec. I was so excited to get talking. You have been, and it actually reframes your comments perfectly, because you have been in this industry since 1988, and that gives you such a panorama. You were 2.5 when you joined, I know. And
exactly. Yet I'm only 35 years old. Isn't that amazing?
It's remarkable. It's completely remarkable. And you would not surprise me, since you're so astute, would not surprise me. So you've been in this industry since 1988. You began at Microsoft in Ireland, and you joined Vistatec in 1997. So you have a great purview both of the industry and of your company. Very few people have been at the same company for quite so long. So I just wanted to take that step back to really frame the groundedness and solidity of your comments, because you have seen it all, and the arc from the original LPS, it's kind of like from an abacus to a laser beam. You have really seen the very start of probably even pre-localization in a way, all the way
Just
through.
about, because of course, Microsoft really and Lotus development as it was back in the day, there were few companies that they kind of wrote the book on, I think, localization as a discipline really back then. They both companies deserve some kudos because they did a lot of good groundwork.
That's wonderful. And you were on the ground for that. So that's terrific.
Yeah. And I can give you an idea as well, something I think about at times, although again, showing my age, but the work I did in Microsoft was one project, a particular release into one language.
Right.
And we had 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, people fall over hearing that today because that reality is so gone. And now it's a constant evolution of small drops every day. It's continuous.
And some of that, back to your comments about machine learning and AI, some of that is, I would imagine, technology related, because what you describe is the shift from software releases to SaaS and things like that, just, constant web delivery instead of shrink wrap software that was in one language being plugged into a machine.
Exactly.
In the cloud all the time.
You got products in boxes, at one point. Remember that?
I still remember floppy disks, so you're not alone in the age department.
No, indeed. Yes. So no, I think I have, and I've been in sales now for a very long time, but the first 10 years of my career was really, as you allude to, was kind of a walk through nearly every discipline in this, within localization, engineering, DGP, translation, editing, writing, whatever it might have been. So I think I came into sales with, fairly solid operational view of how things actually work.
That's wonderful. You probably helped to transform it too, because you were literally at the scene when things shifted from a shrink wrap point of view to a cloud point of view. So
yes,
exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is true. Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit further now into our pandemic related conversation and talk about what kind of trends you have seen. As we were joking before we got started recording, some of this is really on the job training because the pandemic has us all in a constant learning mode.
Yes.
But what kind of trends have you seen in terms of content strategy? Now that we're in this more advanced era of interesting contrast between more technologically driven and more localized content, with the advent of the pandemic and kind of its sort of A-bomb nature of
yes,
arrival.
Of course, yeah.
What kind of content strategy shifts or trends would you like to comment on globally or internationally to the extent that you can? It's probably spotty.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. So from a very, I guess, bird's eye view, you see companies who had maybe, for lack of a better word, dabbled with digital transformation, having to think, rethink what they were doing. And some companies who even were actually already on their way were saying we have to do in 3 months what we have planned to do in 10 years. Slight exaggeration, but really such an absolute acceleration of digital transformation and digital first, clearly, because this is now the way we communicate. And while things were going that way anyway, that trend was, of course, already there. Now it became a necessity. And of course, necessity is the mother of invention. So I think we have, if we look at our, broadly across the companies we work with, there were some that were just so directly impacted that there was very little they could do except just trying to stay afloat. Travel clearly, has been hampered massively. If anyone was in commercial real estate, I'm not sure we have anyone in that particular space, but there are clearly some industry that are really impacted with, very few places to go. But as time goes by, people become very inventive. So we have people, and of course, any action you do creates content, right? So one of our customers is a large commercial insurance company that was very dependent on inspections in person to create inspection reports. And actually, a few months down the line, they started thinking, okay, is there a way to do this work anyway? Rather than just stop doing it, what can we do? What do we do with this current situation? So actually started to bring in, well, take the engineer in the plant and say, okay, you take this laptop and you go to the thing I want to inspect and you show it to me as the inspector, and I can sit here at 200 miles away and actually write down my report and get the work done anyway, or at least say to 80% of what the current requirement might have been. So there are strategies to figure out what's going on and to alleviate, I guess, the impact in the longer run. The set certainly just dragged on and on and on, right? We thought 8 what we were talking about a year ago, you know, and here we are 13 months later.
Fair enough. Yes, I think in a way it was kind of a blessing we didn't know, because if you would have told everyone a year, it would have been, I mean, there was plenty of resistance, I think, as it was, but if people would have known, I think it was kind of a mixed blessing that we didn't know.
Exactly. I'm thinking we would have gone crazy if we had known in advance how long this was going to go on. There was at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was an absolute rush to get communications out, because of course everyone had to change what they were doing in a very, very, very short space of time. So that was, you know, there was an absolute crazy hump of activity in March and April last year, and then things calmed down a little bit. But that was a blip rather than a trend. We have been thinking about people in terms of you know, digital natives and digital pioneers, and then the digital explorers. And there were certainly people coming into that explorer phase that hadn't been really on the scene before with the pandemic. So it's again speeding up a trend that was already there, you know, by a multitude of factors.
And I know you're a bit removed from some of the day-to-day content operations, I would imagine, even as hands-on as you are. But I just wondered if you had seen any shifts that you might be aware from your team about any content strategy shifts, maybe towards retention, because with all the panic, I think retention more than acquisition was probably on people's minds, you know?
Yeah, that is true. And I think over time, people managed to tweak content operations in such a way that they actually that retention was there, but it was while there was a panic and big drop off at the very beginning. And again, we can see that, you know, anything that in the past might have been dealt with in a more removed way. And again, I think you were talking about everything being personalized. We're certainly seeing that. Business to business communications are changing to be very personal. So the language used in a B2B scenario is changing accordingly. So businesses are now speaking to other businesses as if they were people, where that would have been a very, very different tone of voice actually in the past. That makes sense.
That's fascinating. Since we're B2B specialists, I have to ask you, is there a little bit of an example you can give about how it might have been and how it is now? You can make it up.
I can give you an example, maybe not so much exactly in the language, but for example, are you familiar with JCB? This is a very European brand.
Yes.
But it's basically, for those who don't know, it's earth movers and possibly tractors as well. But it's one of these. JCB has become synonymous with the thing itself, much like Hoover, or actually Zoom, right? For the time we live in. So JCB would have been a company, and much like Nike and others, who was not selling direct. They were all selling through distributors or warehouses or agents or other people. You go to jcb.com today, you can buy one online and have it delivered to your house.
Oh, they've gone, what do we call now? DTC, direct to consumer. Wow.
Yes, exactly. And it's fascinating.
That is fascinating. And the writing from business to business is fascinating. I notice a lot of the emails that I'm getting now in my business capacity are much longer. I mean, I would have thought people would go for shorter, you know, content that was more direct, because everyone is now doing 25 things instead of 10. Yeah. but it's the opposite. I'm getting long emails, and kind of very chatty. You know, I'm putting my kids to bed and we're doing our distance learning from home, and I wanted to just let you know about this deal. And
Yeah.
it's a very different tone.
Mm-hmm.
Is
So
that what you meant?
that is that exactly. People in a way have distant communications have getting closer and more personal, and that is definitely a shift. The other thing that's happening, and it's interesting, you're talking about your long emails, because there is also a return of the long form. You know, a couple of years ago, we were all about snackable, and nobody has a longer attention span than 10 seconds or whatever. But it's changing a little bit in that while people's attention needs to be captured with something very, snappy, and good images, and how you draw people in is very important and needs to be crisp. Once you're in, the long form article is coming back, because now there's a lot of tools to make that content very cool as well. And if you can come up with an immersive story, people will stay.
Fabulous. I guess you're trying to get a longer form would be to get more information. Is that the plan?
Yeah, if you, again, clearly this is a lot of this is coming from journalism, but you can also think about blog posts, articles, case studies, all of that. So if you're telling a good story and you're doing it with the right tools and visual aids and making it compelling, people will hang around. Rather than 500 words, it might be 1,200.
Wow. Well, for your business, that must be fabulous. You might have to start charging by the word now.
I know. Oh, imagine.
Word by language. I once heard an executive speak about her very early green days, and she said, I had no idea about pricing. We happen to be pricing experts. I had no idea about pricing, so I just said to the first prospect, 10,000 a month by word, by terminal, she just kept going. It's quite interesting. So I'm glad you are keeping to something more rational, but these are certainly interesting experimental times. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, sure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if you have noticed any unintended consequences for the better as a result of the pandemic conditions, what we might call silver linings.
Yes, I would say so. And it somewhat feels wrong talking about, the good news and the silver linings, but they are there. And I think, as I alluded to at the beginning, necessity is the mother of invention. So there are things happening that some things will start returning back to what we used to call normal, or maybe revert back a little bit. But there are trends here that will just, continue. One thing, it's not entirely our wheelhouse actually, but I look at interpretation. And people who used to be flown and plunked down in seats in conference rooms and having to, or centers, and sit there and actually interpret. So much has happened in the last 12 months in terms of the platforms for distant interpretation. There's no going back, because the cost savings are just astronomical, as you can imagine. So there would be a very rare, I'm sure it still happens, but you'd need a very firm business case to get somebody to travel half across the world, to sit in a room as an interpreter and then fly them back and give them food and shelter and all of that, when there are so many good alternatives.
Really? That must be interesting, especially for content providers who might end up having to work with those interpretations. Do you find the quality, the accuracy almost equivalent?
From what I understand, it's very good. And it really also, I think the other silver lining with that, it just opens up accessibility to to a much wider swath of people if the cost, the cost is so much lower. So that's I find that is actually extremely positive. The other thing that people said, people are doing interesting things, and as I mentioned to you, that boiler inspection, that might stay as a method, because again, less pollution, right? And there's just even said environmental footprint that's actually being saved by being able to do things remotely, not having to drive or travel everywhere. So that's of course a good thing if we can stay that way. We've seen other people being, again, I mentioned the travel industry, again, some interesting things happening. Hotels coming up with methods for, for keeping their environment very safe, and then opening up hotel rooms to people who wanted to use it as an occasional office. So people are, I can't work from home for another day. I'm going nuts, the dog, the kids, whatever it is, I really need some quiet time. And they would actually make hotel rooms available as offices. And I thought that was really clever, actually. Again, you're not going to get to full capacity, but if you can fill up 20% of what you have, what you have available, by all means.
I've had neighbors asking about that, does somebody have a spare room? Is there a hotel around? Because their kids are there, and it's very difficult for some people who have analytical work to do or something along that.
Absolutely. Core did that in Europe, and I think it's been quite successful for them, actually, on the continent.
Well, it sounds like a win-win. And some of these solutions are just going to be safer for a while, and because the vaccination rollouts are so unpredictable in some places. So, having those remote inspections and the remote interpretations are not only cost effective, but until we're really pretty clear about herd immunity worldwide, which is going to take quite a while.
And I'm thinking, figuring out digital or remote ways to do things, even if you can do them to say 80% of the accuracy that you used to have, and save the 20% for special cases, there is no going back. That cost equation is so compelling that people are just going to even just hone what they are already doing remotely even more, so that it's possible. Again, people meeting, I think the face-to-face meetings with humans and business meetings to discuss deeper topics, that is definitely going to come back, because that human connection is very important. But when it comes to pure business processes or content, why would you?
Yeah, I have to agree. How do you see that affecting Vistatec's shift? Is there going to be a shift in your core businesses, do you think? Do you think that will change your prioritization, perhaps?
I don't think we were luck. Oh, I don't believe in luck, by the way, because good generals make their own luck. But I'll use it metaphorically. We were lucky in that a lot of our customers were actually digital natives. So for them, this shift was either some of them benefited.
Of course. Many did.
I'm not saying personally, but economically, just business-wise, actually did really well out of this shift, as well as some of the pioneers who had already started the digital transformation maybe 2 or 3 years earlier and just had to get their skates on right to get done quicker. Where we saw the real challenges for our customers, and it's a smaller portion of them, were the more traditional brick and mortar businesses that had not gotten far enough just yet. But they are catching up, and I said they really had to concentrate and get their minds going, and there's some really interesting innovation going on.
I would imagine so. I mean, what's heartening from your remarks is that they didn't give up, that they're actually committed to plodding on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we haven't seen a single customer go belly up, not one.
Well, as you know, since you are US based, and you have probably seen in the DC area what we see here in the Bay Area, that is certainly not the case. Many small businesses here are no longer here. Many large restaurant chains are no longer here.
Yeah.
So that's really commendable. I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, we can hope to have contributed to a degree, but again, it's business to business, and clearly that many of our customers are large corporations that have, they have a bit of padding, and they are not going to go belly up in 30 days because they had to do a temporary shutdown. With our own company, we actually went pretty much all working from home overnight, and it was seamless. So it was pretty good, actually.
Well, you're so amazing at having been able to be remote from headquarters for so long that, when we advise companies about going global, we always say set up things bi-directionally from the beginning, as you folks did, clearly. Yeah. But many don't. It's all headquarters out. And then this stuff comes up, and it's really tenuous. Those octopus arms get pretty shaky out there. So works well for you. Did you want to have a quick word about Think Global Forum before we conclude today, since that's a key initiative and globalization is starting to come back, but obviously the pandemic has had its own impacts there?
Yeah, so and it's, I suppose, again, talking about having known last year where we would be this year. Last year I think we quickly converted our global awards ceremony to remote, and of course it's going to be the same thing this year again. But that is not what we expected a year ago. Equally, we instituted a travel ban, just as a side note, very quickly for the company, just for the well-being of the staff, and we don't see that lifted anytime soon. So I think that still there is going to be a while before things are really starting to pick up in anything that's close to normality. But Think Global Forum, we've had at least 4 or 5 different events, and I think possibly the pinnacle was the Think Global Summit week that we had in early March, and I was really pleased. We had some fantastic speakers and some really good boardroom sessions. And to my amazement, there didn't seem to be any sign of Zoom fatigue. Everyone was very engaged and contributing. So that's very encouraging for remote events to continue. And we just have to, I think all of us are learning how to make them immersive and compelling, and making people contribute, and making sure that everyone who wants to speak gets to speak in this environment, and using all of the features that are there in the online tools. But Think Global Forum is continuing, going from strength to strength. More and more members, more and more community engagement, and the thought leadership from the community, and that we are driving, I think it's really good for our industry. We are driving a couple of other event series as well. One is called All Things Global, more US focused, more, based on the NPR concept of all things considered, where we interview and have conversations with people that are typically outside our space. I wanted to quote, we were talking about Asia before we started this this chat, actually, just offline, and we were talking to economist David Rosenberg probably about 8 months ago, and he was talking about how it's go east, young man, rather than go west, young man.
Because yes, quite.
Recovering much more quickly than the rest of us, and we are seeing evidence of that in our business for sure.
Well, that's wonderful, and I want to thank you. I'm a member of the Think Global Forum North America Technology section, and it is terrific. Oh, yes. Absolutely terrific. And we are a billable hours business, and between that and Zoom fatigue, just to commit to 3 hours plus on a Zoom meeting takes a lot. And every time I can barely get off, I'm just so enthused and informed, and they are really, talk about value added. You really know what to do. And I thank you very much for including me and for what you provide, especially, a few months ago when global was still kind of in the doghouse. So it's really an important place to solidify the community and to get a better understanding about Vistatec. And I just think you do a terrific job. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Lucy. And we're delighted to have you as part of the Think Global Forum. So
thank you. And exciting other projects that you have. We'll let the viewers go look at some of the other things, the Culture X and some of the other interesting things. Part of what really attracted me to Vistatec and reaching out to you and learning how to work with you, and I'm still learning and want to keep doing that because you do such a terrific job, is the tremendous amount of content that you folks create for yourselves and our community. Not just, obviously do a lot for your clients, as we've discussed, as I was kidding and calling you the Netflix of localization and content providing, but you put out a great deal of content yourselves, and I encourage viewers to go and look at that. In our next slide, you'll see our credits, and you'll see the right details to do that. And I want to thank you again for being our guest, and thank you, viewers, for joining us. Next month, we will have Lisa Anderson, who will be talking with us about global supply chains. Been a few things going on in the Suez Canal lately, and a few other things to talk about, supply chains came up early on when we were all rushing for certain necessities early on in the pandemic. What have we learned about supply chains? What can we adapt, if anything? And so much like content strategy, we're going to take a horizontal approach to what is going on around the world that could give us better insights into navigating pandemic situations from here, because although we're getting vaccinated in the US, as we've said, worldwide, we're not quite done. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us. And My name is Lucy Newcomb. I'm the CEO of Newcomb Global, global business from the inside out. Thanks again for everything, and all the best to you and Vistatec for much continued success. Goodbye.
Thank you, Lucy. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.